So, my name is Laura Stoner, and we are here with Jessica O'Brien on June 13th, 2023, and we're talking about your experience with the Vietnam War. So, let's start. What is your full name?
Jessica O'Brien.
Okay. You didn't have a middle name?
No, I didn't have a middle name. My original name was Jessica Borzilleri, and my parents thought that was enough.
How do you spell your maiden?
Borzilleri.
Thank you.
And this period we're talking about, when I was married, I had another name.
Okay, so what was that
It
name?
was Compitello.
Uh-huh. Can you
Compettello.
Okay. Thank you. So what year were you born?
1948.
And what did your parents do?
My dad was the high school principal in my town. Did that for 25 years. He was a math teacher. And my mom was a elementary school teacher. She also had her own nursery school for a number of years. So they're both teachers.
They valued education?
Yes, everybody in my family was a teacher but me.
And did you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother. He's 88, so he's a fair bit older than me. He lives in Lake Placid, New York. He also was an educator. And I had a sister who was 5 years younger than he was, who died when she was 22, so it's quite a while
ago. And you were born in
Long Beach, New York.
Long Beach, New York.
Long Island.
Uh-huh. And then how did your education go? You finished high school?
I finished high school. I graduated. I went to Queens College the next year, which is in Flushing, New York, which I never thought was a funny name until later. And I finished a year, and then that summer I got married to my husband.
So how did you meet your husband?
Well, he was a musician, and I was good friends with a musician all through high school, and I met him that way.
And what made you decide that you wanted to marry this musician?
I wanted to marry anybody who asked me, and he was the first one. So no, I was very, very keen to leave home. And my parents were, my mom was 40 when I was born. My dad was almost 50. They were really like two generations away because they were immigrant. They were from immigrant families. They weren't immigrant, and they were educated, but they were really a different generation. And I mean, I lived on the beach. Long Beach is it's a barrier beach off of Long Island, but I wasn't allowed to go to the beach by myself. You know, the things were pretty strict. So I was looking to get out. So, and you know, I fell in love, not very difficultly. So, yeah.
So what year would that be?
We got married in '66. No, 60 or I think it was 66. Yes. 66. So what happened was I was dating Ray Compitello. He lived in Garden City, which is out on the island a bit, and or on the way back to the city, actually. And he lived with his parents, who were Italian, very Italian. I don't know if they were born in Italy. I think they might have been born in the States, but they were pretty close to being born in Italy. And I spent a lot of time there while I was going to Queens. I kind of decovered his place and stuff. And then in the end of the year, June probably it was, he got his draft notice. He went to the draft board to say that he had tickets to go to France. He wanted to move to France. And that he was a pacifist and he didn't believe in the army, believe in the army or the war. And they said, you can't do that. And so they said, you have to come back and we will draft you. You need to be drafted. And then you can declare that you're a pacifist and try to get a conscience objector status, which is untrue. So he did. He went back and, you know, they grabbed him and off he went to San Antonio, Texas, Fort Sam Houston, and had basic training there as a conscience objector. He put in an appeal, and that's bad. That was really bad because they weren't very fond of conscience objectors. This is 1966, kind of like August. beginning of July 1966. So he finished his 2 months basic training, and I wrote to him every day.
So you're married at this.
No,
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 you're not
no.
married. Okay.
And near the end of his basic training, he called me because my letters were kind of a lifeline. I mean, they were all so upset. Those guys, they were all COs, and they were really, it was awful.
So how many would you say there were with him?
I don't know.
But more than one?
Oh yeah, no, there was they were like a whole company of them.
Oh, okay. So they
Yeah.
put them all together.
Yeah, they put them all together, and so they treated them all differently. Right? They had a really tough basic training, and they were on a base where people were being sent to Vietnam all the time, and this is pretty early.
This is very early, yeah.
And so he asked me if I'd marry him, because he thought he could handle it if I married him. So he came back from basic training, and I had to find a place we could get married quickly because a lot of places you needed a blood test, and that would take a couple of weeks, and he only had 2 weeks leave. So I found that Baltimore or Maryland was a state that you could do it without a blood test. So we took the train to Maryland and got our license, and then went back 2 days later. You had to wait 48 hours or something, and got married at the Justice of the Peace.
Did your family?
My family, it's so funny to think about later. He came and spoke to my mother and father. You know, he did the standard thing, and my dad really tried to get us to wait a year, the standard response. I mean, I was only 18. Wait a year, and nobody got married at 18 in my family. I mean, everybody finished college, you know. He would send me anywhere I wanted to go for, you know, and all this sort of stuff, or send both of us or whatever. And then he sort of sweet talked my mother, and she kind of, oh gosh, you know, if I'm away at war, you know, in Vietnam, it would mean so much to me to know that she was going to be waiting there for me, and so he won them over. And but when we went back, I was wearing a little polka dot suit, a skirt and top, and he was wearing his army uniform because he got a reduction on the train. We're taking the train to Baltimore from New York. They dropped us off at the train station. I mean, years later, I thought they wouldn't let me go to the beach by myself. They didn't come to the wedding, which was not very far away. Anyway, so we were in the train. We went to Maryland. He changed into jeans and a t-shirt, and I changed into Bermuda shorts and a tank top, and that's how we got married. I have that picture of that. And so we're at the Justice of the Peace, and they go, Sam, we got another one. And there were some other couples there. So we went in, and one of the couples witnessed for us, and we witnessed for them. And then the four of us went and saw Born Free at the movie theater. That was kind of appropriate. And then my parents had given us money to go on a honeymoon. So we took the train to Miami. This is in August. August 31st we got married. And the train, it was an overnight kind of thing, but we were sitting up, you know. Listen, I remember the middle of the night turning around and saying, oh, I just got married, this is my honeymoon. People kind of looked at me like, oh my God. Well, because in the train, the air conditioning was broken, and it was like 65 degrees in the train, and nobody had any warm clothes. We kind of put on everything we brought, you know. And when we got to Miami, we were both sick. We both had colds. But we had a good time. And then he had to go back.
So how long was that break that you got married on? Like he came home?
Well, he had 2 weeks off, and we had to wait. I think we were not even a week, maybe 5 days.
And was he got leave from the army?
Yeah, you get 2 weeks off after basic training.
Okay, so it was after basic training.
And
okay.
You get 2 weeks off. Yeah.
So was he writing you and kind of talking up this idea of getting married?
No, I don't think he ever wrote me. Oh, he must have done something. I can't remember. I don't remember getting any. I don't remember any physical letters, but there might have been. The memory's not that good. But no, he. Oh, so this is embarrassing. So he called me and asked me, would I marry him? I said yes. And then I told my mother, and I told my friends, and then he called back a day or two later and said he changed his mind. I said, no, sorry.
Binding.
That's not allowed. And so we did.
And so he talked your parents into letting
Yeah.
him marry you even after he had said.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So he doubled down.
He got cold feet. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if he hadn't gone in the army, we wouldn't have gotten married. You know, we weren't that. It was that more of a casual
Uh-huh.
relationship. I mean, I was 18. He was 21. You know,
Was there any benefit to you or he by getting married in terms of like
Army-wise?
financial, like maybe they pay you. I know I've heard of
yes,
people getting paid more
they
if
pay
you're
an
married.
allotment to the wife. So, and he never accepted any promotions. So he was always a recruit, which is below a private. So he was a recruit, which gets the lowest amount of money all the way through his year and a half. And I got more than he did. I got the allotment, which was $95 a month. And my mother, thank God, would send us $100 a month, which made us survive. Because we needed a car.
Mm-hmm. So you've gone to Miami, you've gotten a cold.
Yeah, we got over our colds. We had a good time. We came back. He has to I took him to the airport to get on the plane to go back to Texas. I'm crying the whole way. On the way home, I got a speeding ticket. I was crying so much. And then, and I cried for the next like 5 days or something. And then he called and said, I can't stand it. Go ahead.
Was there some sort of strategy in him not taking a raise, like a raise in position? Yeah, a promotion.
Because he didn't believe in the armed forces. He didn't want to be promoted to another rank. He didn't,
Okay.
He was a recruit, and that was it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was really a very moral based thing for him. He was a pacifist. He didn't believe in the armed forces or anything. So he called and said, I can't stand it. Going back was even worse. I can't stand it another minute. I'm going to desert. I'm going to leave. And then he said he had to call me back. And my father had been listening on the phone. And I went downstairs, and my father was in tears, which was very unusual. His Italian father, not something they do. And he said, I couldn't. He couldn't cope with that. He was a respected person in the community, and this was really early. Nobody was doing that. So
you would say that the overall public opinion about Vietnam it hadn't turned the way that it did later on.
Nobody really knew anything about it.
So we were all still kind of rah, let's go.
You do what you have to do, like Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
So he called me back, shortly after, and I said, my father can't handle it. I said, if I come, will you be able to continue? He said, oh, I was hoping you'd ask, but I didn't want to ask you, but yes. So I said, I was thrilled. I said, oh, okay. And so I packed my bag that night, and I snuck it down to our car. We had what did we have? A 1960 Buick Roadmaster, some convertible, old car. It must have been a 50-something, 58 or something. And that, rolled like a bucket. It was a great car. Anyway, we got it for $100. I put my suitcase in there, one suitcase, and didn't sleep all night. I was so scared. And the next morning I came down to breakfast and said, well, I'm going to go to Garden City shopping. I'm going to go to Lord & Taylor's, and I'll see you later. And off I went, and I went to his parents' house. I had took a little bit of money that I was getting from Social Security because my dad was retired and I was still 18 or something like that. And then I went to my in-laws, who drove me to the airport, and I got in the plane and I went to Texas.
So you didn't tell your parents?
No, I called my mother later that day. Guess where I am? She was not thrilled.
So then where did you leave the car? At the parents' house?
Probably, yeah. My in-laws, yes, because we got it later, so I must have left it. But it was like eloping, except I was already married. Yeah.
When you got married and then you came back home and then he went back to service, what was the plan? Like all along, what was your plan?
Well, originally I was going to go back to college, right? I only finished 1 year, but
because your marriage didn't change your status at the school or anything, no.
But I couldn't face it. So I enrolled in the Catherine Gibbs Secretarial School, which is the first high-class secretarial school in New York City where you wear gloves and a hat, and you take the train and you stay at the Barbizon. I mean, it's expensive, and it was just not me. I don't think I could have done it. But I think the last minute I decided I'd go back to college.
So,
But, I mean, it wasn't long enough. I mean, it was still September. School hadn't started yet.
so then you went to Texas.
I went to Texas, and you could stay on the base. Guests could stay on the base for a couple of days, so I got to see him, and couldn't spend the night or anything, but I got to see him. And then I got an apartment in San Antonio, and this is 1966. And in 1966, most of the big cities in the United States were a disaster. You know, that was the year that New York went bankrupt, and it was pre-renovation of any of the cities, and San Antonio was awful. It was really, they hadn't done the Alamo or anything yet. It was just a dump. And I was from New York, you know, Long Island. I was a spoiled, you know, Jewish princess, half Jewish princess, half Italian. And so we're in this really creepy apartment, and we met some other people, but he couldn't, you know, he could only come every once in a while. You know, and sometimes, I don't think he could stay overnight. I don't think so. So that went on for a little while. And then he said, they asked us if we wanted to train as X-ray technicians, because he was being trained as a non-combat medic. That's what they did with the COs. Did he want to train as an X-ray technician? And he signed up, and he watched them cross his name off, because he was a conscientious objector. But they gave them all a test, and he must have done very well on the test because they put him in the program. Do you need to stop? No. So they put him in the program, which meant he could live off post. So that was great. I got a different apartment. There was another couple that had a car, so we kind of went to the same apartment building, which was awful. There were rats behind it was awful. Anyway. And we didn't get along with those people for very long. They didn't like me cursing. And in those days, you know, in the 60s, a lot of cursing. So, yeah, so we were waiting to find out where he'd get stationed.
And in his like process, is he gaining any kind of knowledge about the process of being a conscientious objector, or like what his options are?
There weren't any options. His options were to wait for his appeal to get ruled on.
Okay, so all along he's waiting for his appeal and trying to bide.
And voluntarily serving. I said you can voluntarily serve while you wait for your appeal, or you can sit in jail, which would look better if you voluntarily served. That's what they told him, so that's what he did.
And did he have any idea how long the appeal?
There's no way to know. All you knew was that to go to Vietnam, you needed 13 months left in your 2 years. That was a standard. Or maybe it wasn't 13 months. I think it was less than that. But there was some standard period. So as long as you had that much left, there was always a risk. And there were particular times when everybody waited for their orders. You know, like when he was getting his training in San Antonio, he was only going to be in San Antonio till a certain date, and then he would get a new posting. And he knew that. And so we're waiting for that. And the base, Fort Sam Houston, was the base where they had the hospital where all the burn victims came. So I remember walking through the hospital, because if you needed any kind of, you know, a checkup or anything, you had to go to that hospital, and seeing, I don't remember clearly because you really didn't look at them, but there were people with sort of melted faces and stuff like that. It was pretty awful. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, President Johnson came to visit. Now he got his gallbladder removed, and he had just come back from Vietnam, and he was tan, which really made me mad. Remember that? And the helicopter came down, and I happened to be at the hospital that day, and we all stood in a circle, the people. I wasn't with my husband. And he came around and shook everybody's hand. And when he got to me, I wanted to hit him, but I was too scared. I mean, I just kind of froze. And he looked at me, and then he went on because I didn't shake his hand. And I thought, well, I got really close to being in jail, or to my husband being in jail for sure.
Maybe you consciously objected
Yeah.
the handshake.
Right, that's right. That was the best I could do at 18.
Did you? So, but what are you doing with your time now? Like
Well,
you're
I'm
not.
trying to find a job in
Okay.
San Antonio, because I had worked every summer, stuff like that. So I went around and I had to use a bus, and we didn't have much money, and all I had was a suitcase full of clothes. I had to kind of gradually get things I needed. Well, especially when we moved to the apartment, I had to have a pillow. I had to get pillows, and sheets, and so gradually, my mother sent me $100 a month. Went to stuff like that, and $100 is a lot of money at that time. It's probably like getting $1,000 a month now. And yeah, we lived very hand to mouth, but that was all. It was all very romantic. I was young, and I was so glad to be on my own. So, but I was looking for a job, and the only job I could find was ushering in a movie theater, and it paid like 32 cents an hour, some absolutely ridiculous amount of money. I remember thinking, I was from New York. I mean, this was not great. I made more than that working in the grocery store,
Mhm.
So I didn't get a job, and he got moved. I don't remember how soon. He got moved for the winter. So that was September, October. So it was just a few months more he was there. So his orders finally came through. Everybody on the base is terrified. Everybody is, because they don't know when they're going to get sent, if they're going to get sent. So just a feeling, as soon as you walk on the base, you felt scared. You could feel it. So he got stationed in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, which is right outside Valley Forge, in a hospital there doing X-ray stuff. So he was in San Antonio, Texas for the summer, and Valley Forge for the winter. So typical Army travel plan. And so we went there, which was probably only about 2 hours from home, hour and a half, 2 hours from home. So every weekend we drove home. I don't know how we did it in that car, but we did it. And then during the week, we lived in a room above a pub. The only pub. It was a very small town, and every day for dinner we would get submarine sandwiches called Zeps. They were called Zeps in Pennsylvania, different name everywhere. That's what we had for dinner every night. Yeah, because I couldn't go. There was no place to cook or anything like that. So. But on the weekends, we got fed decently. So that was it. So that was this. So then we're waiting for the next orders, because that was only like a 2-month posting, I think. And then he had just enough time left to go to Vietnam. And we waited, and it was put off, and finally it came through, and he was stationed in Leavenworth, Kansas. And we're like, what? So we were there for tornado season, so they continued their travel. The lovely travel plan. And when we moved there, we took the white convertible. It died as soon as we got to Leavenworth. Very lucky. We had everything we owned in it, a little TV and some other stuff. And it was like a 30-hour drive. And my mother every week would insist on talking to him on the phone, because she was sure he was in prison. We were just saying. I mean, this was a musician, whatever. So,
Is he enjoying the X-ray work?
no.
So he never had any desire to take up that trade.
He was a jazz musician, and he was good. So we lived in a couple of places, and one Kansas was interesting. I ended up working at a Hallmark card factory, which Hallmark card is stationed in
Kansas City.
Kansas City. And Leavenworth had 6 or 12, I think 6 prisons in it. Had the county male prison, the county female prison, the state male prison, the female prison, and the federal penitentiary, and the largest army stockade in the country. That's all in Leavenworth, a town of like 6,000 people, right? So there were more people in the jails. And, you know, once a week you'd see signs, don't pick up hitchhikers, somebody's escaped from somewhere or other. And it was a rural place. I mean, there was nothing familiar to me at all. So we lived there, and every day I would drive him to the post, and then I worked in the Hallmark Card Factory, which was a condemned building. It was a big 3-story wooden building that was condemned, and there were like, I mean, it was really big. It was a warehouse. And what I did was did handwork on the cards. So like if they had like little silver things on their earrings, I was gluing them on, and you had to do so many an hour. And I'm sitting at a table with a bunch of women, mostly black women, couple of young women, all incredibly rural, and the white girls were scary. They all had guns at home and stuff like that. And so that was funny, and I was pretty good at it. I was pretty good at hand stuff.
Were any of the other women working in the factory wives
Wives?
of military members?
No.
Well, how did the race relations amongst your working community
Well,
work?
I mean, they were just older black women mostly, and you know, we got along fine. I talked too much. I would get in trouble because they didn't want us to talk at all. And you spend all day sitting around a table with other people doing handwork. How can you not
Feels
talk?
conducive.
Yeah. But and they had been doing this their whole lives. Oh God, I couldn't believe it. That was, you know, that was the only job in town. They made like $70 a week when we worked 6 days. That was, yeah. And then the week or so before I started the job, somebody lost their head in the elevator in an accident. And it was a whole wooden building, and we were told that if there was a tornado, we were supposed to go down into the basement. I said, oh, forget it. The whole building's going to fall on us. And it's full of skids of cards like that high,
Heavy.
weighing thousands and thousands of pounds, you know. And you'd be going through skids of cards. Like for Christmas, the cards that are glittery, well, it was ground glass, and your fingers would bleed, you know. And I'd be saying, how come we don't have a union, you know? I was 18 years old and spoiled, you know. People kind of did. I didn't get in trouble because nobody paid any attention to me. I was too young to be meaningful. So that was an interesting experience. Yeah. So so I'd drop him off at the hospital, and then I'd go to work, and then I would pick him up afterwards, and we go home.
So now you're still worried that he
He
might.
stopped.
Yeah.
It's all right. I don't get to tell the story very often.
Okay.
Yeah? Oh, okay.
So are you still worried about the time he has left
Yeah.
to serve?
Yeah, one more. Still has enough time. That's why I don't know how long it was exactly. But finally, his appeal came through after 14 months, I think. And they said, no, you can't be a conscientious objector because you're Catholic. Catholics can't be conscientious objectors. And it was signed by Hershey, who was the big guy at the time, General Hershey. And so he said, okay, I refuse to serve. That's it, I'm done. Because I don't want to finish this. This is not just on a moral grounds, ethical grounds. I don't want to tell my kids I was honorably discharged from the Army. So he refused to serve, and they put him in the stockade. And I went home alone, and I was home alone, and a tornado came through town. Well, I was home alone, and the people downstairs that we rented from were deaf, so they couldn't hear all the warnings. So it was a comical situation. Anyway, it didn't hit us. And then his commanding officer, who was a captain, who couldn't have been more than 25, and he was really young, but he was the commanding officer, you could tell. It's just amazing when you realize how young these guys were. He called us in, and he said, okay, I want to talk to you. This is what's going to happen. They're going to ask you to finish your term, and if you say no, they're going to put you in prison for 5 years. Right here, somewhere. And then when you get out after 5 years, they're going to ask you if you'll finish your term. And if you say no, they're going to put you in prison for another 5 years. So this was early on, and they were trying to make, examples of people. He said, why don't you two young people go take a walk around the post and come back and tell me what you decide. So we did, And we had already put in an application to Canada to immigrate, but we hadn't heard anything. So we thought,
How did you know to do that?
just called or looked it up or whatever. Yeah. It was like, how did I know how to find a state where I could get married without it? I just got on the phone in the Yellow Pages and crazy. So he said, we're going to go to Canada. So he said, okay, I will serve. And so you get extra duties, which is your punishment for having said he wouldn't serve. So he had to do many extra jobs. He had to work late, work on Saturdays and stuff like that. And then that was over. In 2 weeks, that was over. And when we took 2 weeks leave, it was a month before we take 2 weeks leave. And we went home and we saw our parents and we had, and we saw our parents and we told them what we were going to do. And then we got in the car and we drove up and we went over in Montreal where they were having the World's Fair. It was the World's Fair. And we just went in as visitors. And I don't remember hardly anything about the World's Fair. Then we drove across to Brantford, which is west of Toronto, west of north, I think. When we decided to go to Toronto because we couldn't speak French. And an old minister of mine was living there, and he was our sponsor. Well, that was later. We went and visited him, and he put us up for a little while, and then like a week or something. And then and I think we were very disappointing to his parishioners. I think they thought we were going to be these knowledgeable, sage, activists sort of, and we weren't. We were just dorky. And then we went to Toronto. We found a place to live. And I got a job. I worked for ACTRA, which is the Performers Union in Canada, and got to meet all the big Canadian actors, none of whom anybody had ever heard of, but it was the equivalent of Charlton Heston and people like that. I had a secretarial kind of job. And then after a while, we thought, well, we haven't heard anything from immigration. So I called immigration, and I said, I haven't heard anything on my application. And they said, oh, that's an application for people who are living outside of the country. It's not an application for when you're in the country. You are here illegally. You need to leave. So they said, you can immigrate. You can come back in and immigrate at the border. So we went home, which was scary because he was AWOL. But, it was a few months. It was months later. So we went home. We got all the medical forms done by our doctors and stuff. And then we came back and immigrated at the border.
I think it's an interesting concept because the way our society is now, you kind of feel like records are so integrated. So, like, you would think if you had to go to the doctor now and you were AWOL or you had some sort of, thing hang over your head that they would know and they wouldn't give you what you needed.
Yeah.
So to me, this is just so fascinating, like surreal that you can do all these.
Internet. There's no danger of that. So at the border, they put us in separate rooms and they questioned us and they asked him if Canada was in a war, would he fight? And he said no. And they asked a whole bunch of questions. I don't remember the other ones, but it was a point system at that point. So you got so many points for your education and so many points so we both had a year of college. And I had a job and he had the promise of a job as an x-ray technician. I don't know how he got that. The promise of a job as an x-ray technician. And so we had enough points and we got in. We got in as landed immigrants. Very lucky. So we went back to our apartment and I went back to my job and he went back to not working and practicing at home all day long. And
who was the president of Canada at that time?
Trudeau. Well, was it Trudeau yet? I think so. Yeah.
Because I had read that he was
Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
He was very liberal and was very open to allowing U.S.
Yes. Yeah, then the shit hadn't hit the fan yet about all of that. And then I found out that the FBI had gone to visit my parents and his parents and said, your son-in-law is AWOL. Do you know where he is? or where I am. It was funny. It was there wasn't a connection. It was like, do you know where they are? It was like, and my parents didn't. My parents said, would you tell if you knew? But his parents were really frightened by it because they were working class people. And then the RCMP came and visited us.
So what is that? So tell me what the RCMP.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It's
Okay.
national. They came and visited us and said, well, you shouldn't go back because they're going to have records at the border and you're not, they're going to swoop you right up if you go back. We said, yeah, we know, we're not going back. And I went back, but he couldn't.
So when you went back, did they not connect the two of you together?
Wouldn't matter.
So women
I didn't
didn't
do anything illegal.
So you weren't like aiding and abetting, I don't know. Could they say that?
Well, it just wasn't something that existed yet. Something else I was going to say.
Going back to
Yeah,
your family?
something about that. Oh. That I would go back. Oh, it'll come to me. Yeah, so I think we were together. We were only married a total of 3 years. And I think we were together like 1.5 of those 3 years.
And did you have any children?
No. And one summer, he didn't work much. But he got very paranoid. It's hard to be a musician and be paranoid because people are looking at you the whole time. I found that really hard. He was getting pretty disturbed. But one summer he got a job with Trudeau at the Manoir Richelieu, which is out east of Quebec City. Really beautiful place. It's like the Frontenac and all those big hotels. It's one of those. And he was playing in a group there, and they would play over the area, over the pool, up on a big building, and Trudeau came and was there for a while when we were there, and shook his hand and watched him swim. He was a real show-off, but he was very charismatic. And that was interesting. And then
What instrument did your husband play?
saxophone, tenor and alto, soprano, and flute. He was quite good. He should have gone to music school, really. But I don't know if he had enough discipline. What else can I tell you?
So how are your families feeling while you guys are, your families?
Well, my family's more educated, but after a while, so when I know by the time the FBI came, my father had heard enough from other people that he wasn't upset about it anymore. He knew that it was already kind of more public.
Do you mean conscientious objecting, or do you mean
Both.
the Vietnam War?
No, conscience objecting and draft dodging and all of that were much more prevalent and not looked down upon. There were, people were unsure whether they thought it was a good idea or not to go to Vietnam. And it really was mostly the poor kids who were being sent. It was really awful to think about it. That's who it was. I know in my high school class it was the poor kids. Black kids, some Puerto Rican kids, and poor kids. Canada was very liberal at that point, but also very strange. But you want to know about him, about Vietnam, so let me think.
No, I mean, the whole experience
Well,
is...
I remember when I worked at ACTRA, I worked on a main street, and the big Eaton store was down the street. That's a big department store in Canada. And I would walk there at lunch, shop around. And I worked for a union. The ACTRA was a union, and I was in a union, so I would get like these long lunches and stuff like that. So anyway, I would walk to Eaton's, and I would be smoking a cigarette, and people would look at me very strangely. And then I learned that in Canada, women who smoke on the street are prostitutes. It was like, huh? I mean, never occurred to me. My mother smoked, and my mother was a very proper person, it's like an arbitrary rule or something. So there were funny things, and then none of the stores were open on Sundays, and you couldn't get anything to drink unless there was food. You know, the blue laws were really strict at that point. And then I remember a number of years later that they would cordon off certain aisles in the store which you couldn't shop on Sunday. It was very interesting. And the National Health Care came in while we lived there, and I had my kids there for nothing. It was a very liberal place. It's changed because it's like the fly on the elephant's back, right? But it was a pretty wonderful place to live.
So you were happy with your.
I was happy. I spent such a short time with him in Canada. That wasn't most of my experience because I was there 28 years and I spent a year and a half with him. Not necessarily happy. We weren't the best couple.
Well, I mean, it's.
Yeah, well, you were really young, you know.
It sounds like a lot of stress for two people to be under. A lot of disruption
Yeah.
and a lot of stress and uncertainty, and which could lead to paranoia.
Yeah.
So when you divorced, if you don't mind me
Yeah.
asking, when you divorced, were there reasons
I was
concern
already
this?
not living with him. I moved into a community, a therapeutic community, because I felt like I needed some help, mostly from my family, issues, and I wanted to be a better person for him. 'Cause he was really into Eastern religions, and he was like way up here, And, it turned out that I was the one holding us together because he fell apart when I left. So I was the one working, I was the one who got the meals on the table and did the practical stuff.
Uh-huh.
So he eventually came into the community for a while, but then he left. He went to Australia because he couldn't go back to the States, and he didn't like Canada. And it was too liberal, but that's not the right way to put it. It's not that he was conservative. It was that it wasn't gutsy enough or something.
Too complacent, maybe?
Yeah,
Too safe?
yeah, too safe, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Not hip enough.
Well, it was funny. I was doing some research, and it seemed like in the 2010s, they were finding people that had been deserted the army, and they've arrested them.
Yeah, you're never forgiven. There's no amnesty for deserters.
Yeah.
Yep. And then who knows how long they have to serve and whether they ever let them out.
Yeah.
Draft dodgers got pardoned, but not deserters. Because you can't pardon deserters. What's going to happen in the next war,
You don't want to lose your
No.
population. Yeah.
They used to shoot them.
Yeah. Did he, I mean, you were still friendly with him after you divorced a little bit?
We never saw each other. I was living in this community. He was, who knows where he was. He was actually going downhill. I love your name because we smoked a lot of pot, and I always said, I told you this, I only smoked once from 1967 to 1985. That was the standard line. So, but once I got in the community, we didn't do that anymore. I didn't do that anymore. But he got in with, some pretty seedy musician people. Strange things happened. He was good friends with a very disturbed guy who really gave me the creeps. It's part of why I got out of there. So he didn't do well.
And then he went to Australia, and then you lost
I
track.
can't find him anywhere. I think he died. I think he died in the early 80s from AIDS because he was doing a lot of experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Did you keep in touch with his family at all?
No, and I feel really badly about that. But I wasn't. It wasn't until I got older that I started to look back and think how good they'd been to me. I knew that, but I wasn't very considerate. And then I looked back maybe about 10 years ago, and they'd both died. And I felt bad because I would have liked to have. I'd spent a lot of time going back telling people, how much I appreciated what they did for me and stuff. There's people I missed. It's too late.
Hindsight,
Yeah.
I mean, you got to get perspective.
Yeah, and you got to do things in time because when people are, 30, 40 years older than you are, they're not around when you're mature enough to think about that.
Yeah. So I love the full breadth of your story,
Oh.
even though it doesn't all involve the Vietnam War. So you joined this community, which maybe some people might call a commune.
Yeah, well, yeah, they might call it a cult. We're beginning to look back on it as a cult.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very big community. It was in downtown Toronto. At one point, we had maybe 15 houses, and these are three-story. These are very downtown, in downtown Toronto, called the Annex, which was the first residential area. And there were 600 people involved in this community, about 300 of whom lived in these houses. So I spent 15 years living in houses with between 10 and 30 people. 30 people would have been a number, a few houses. And we had personal therapy with therapists, and then we had group therapy with the houses. And we had a farm where we did work therapy. And it was quite amazing, but it had a charismatic leader. This is where the cult comes in. And that she was Welsh, and she was very imposing and very odd. And she had a family who were also involved. And she was incredibly insightful, but she would use that insight against some people. She really liked guys better than she liked girls, gotta say. But so a lot of people were hurt. And then there was stuff around families where kids would be taken away and given to other families. And we all thought, well, Lee knows best, and yeah, that person must be very disturbed. And that's where the cult side gets into it. And my experience when I left, and up until maybe 5-10 years ago, it was an absolutely marvelous experience. It changed my life. It was really good for me. It was such a marvelous place. And then a bunch of us have been getting together on Zoom once a month and talking about it, and things have come to light, and we're like, oh boy. No, we were just so lost that we thought this was, it did have really good thing. It really did save my life. I don't think I could be the person I am, but it destroyed other people's lives. So that's kind of creepy. There've been a couple of books about it. Interesting place. And she was a really interesting person, but
Did it have a specific
yeah,
name?
it's called Therafields.
Therafields. And then the leader was
Lee Henley Smith.
Lee Henley Smith.
Lea. I don't think she has an H in the end. Yeah, so there's a couple of books on it. The most recent one is the one that starts to reveal things that kind of mattered. And but for the last 6 or 7 years, I lived in a milieu, we called it. It was 4 houses with it all backed into a yard, so there's a great big center area. And we all met together, and it was a pretty wonderful place. I don't think anybody was badly hurt there at all. We had a really good therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And those are my friends, and I go in a couple of weeks, I go up to Canada, and we all have a July 1st, which is Canada Day party, and not all of us, just a few of us, and yeah, do that every year.
So do you still have Canadian citizen? Like, do you have
I
dual?
never had citizenship.
Oh,
we couldn't get dual citizenship until about the last 5 years I was there. And I did apply, but it never got done, and I didn't do it. That I wasn't willing to give up my American citizenship.
So you met you married.
So I met someone in the Therafields community, and we got married in 1984.
And then
then I had my kids.
You had your kids. And how do your kids feel about their
Well, my kids
upbringing?
are Canadian and American. They have Canadian passports and American passports. And they think pretty fondly of Canada, and they haven't stayed in touch with the people. They were all my age, but they know them, and they know where I go and what I do, and but they've got their own lives now. They're in their 30s,
So when you were in the community, you worked for the community?
No, no, no. We
No.
all had jobs.
Okay.
Well, some people worked for the community, but most of us had jobs. Very small number. There was a staff, but yeah, no, we had jobs, and then we, in the beginning, well, I think all the way through, you paid kind of according to your income. So I remember that I was able to start because we finished, my first husband and I finished our car payment. So I was able to give that into the community. Yeah, and we didn't pay enormous amounts. That wasn't bad. However, one of the things that was very wrong about it was we did a lot of work. We rebuilt houses, we renovated houses, we took a condo and a very expensive condo building on the water that was owned by the family and renovated it and made it worth like 2-3 times as much, and then they sold it and they kept all the money. And there were people who did a lot of construction work, guys who were really taken advantage of. We didn't think about it at the time because it was all considered to be therapy, but some people were pretty pissed about it. Underneath, that doesn't help your therapy any. I like that kind of thing. I'm happy as long as I'm working with people. I am very happy. That is helpful to me, but that's not always true for everybody. Some people are capable of doing it. They don't need to be doing it for nothing.
So then, what led to you leaving the community?
Well, it kind of the leader got she had diabetes and eventually kind of disintegrated, and so the community started. Some things came at her son, her oldest son. They had helped him run a school for kids, for a bunch of the Fairfields kids, and supported him. And it turned out that he got prosecuted for interfering with some of those girls and went to prison. These are the things that, like, oh, and he was a very powerful guy. I went out with him a couple of times. I remember my therapist saying, "Stay away. If he gets anywhere near you, I'm going to do him in." And I thought, huh? Yeah. But he was he was a scary guy. He was just very powerful, emotionally. And so things were starting, and people were, well, I was 35. We were starting to think about having families and, getting married. So we did. People kind of drifted. We drifted off. Didn't last too many years after that. We were all sent off with good feelings. It was time.
So, you and your husband stayed in Canada after you left the community for.
Yeah, my husband was a draft dodger. Anyway.
The second husband is a draft
from
America.
Detroit. Marry anybody who's in the and that's probably true, I think. Yeah, he was a draft dodger.
So then, how was his experience different from your first husband's?
He was a little younger. Well, he was a fair amount younger because he was a year younger than me, and I was 3 years younger than my husband. So he had a year of college but dropped out. And that's when he got drafted. His mother dropped him off at the bridge, and over he went. So they were supportive of it. Draft dodging was pretty big by that point.
Did he ever get amnesty?
Yes. Well, I think amnesty was automatic.
Okay.
It happened.
So he could just go back.
Yeah. And it was Carter. So when Carter was in the 80s, right?
Late 70s.
Yeah. So that's not very long after he came, maybe 10 years, 8 years, something like that. I don't ever remember thinking he couldn't go to the United States, but I probably wasn't that close to him then. Yeah, so we met, and we did. We're sure to go to the American Embassy and get our kids registered when the second one was born. We got them both Social Security numbers and stuff like that. He was from Detroit, near Detroit area, from Dearborn, Michigan. And then eventually, we were working. We were working at a job. We were both working. The kids were young, but in school, and he got a job, this company called STN, Smart Talk Network. And it was when phone system got, what's it called, deregulated.
Uh-huh.
And you could get your long distance elsewhere. And in Canada, that happened before it happened in the States. And so we worked for this company that sold long distance packages. And we went door to door, which you couldn't do here either, but it was a really great experience. We went door to door saying, hi, sorry to bother you. We're just talking to all the Bell, because it was Bell, all the Bell customers, which is everybody. We're just talking to all the Bell customers in your area because did you know that there's a new service and you can do this and that it doesn't cost you anything. Or, you know, you pay for the calls, but it's much less. And all we needed was a old bill and a signature on the form. Oh man, I just raked it in. It was terrifying and wonderful. Like going from door to door is very scary. It's like, you know, you're kind of putting yourself out each time. And only one guy told me to F off. That was the only time. But you didn't want to do it. But, you know, you made so much money for each one. And we made a lot of money. And we became trainers, and he became the inside trainer that would train people for 4 days before they went out. And you had to learn the pitch and stuff. And I was the outside trainer, and I would walk to people's doors with 5 guys behind me and do this. And we would all go in. They would let us all in, and I would do my pitch, and I would get the thing from them and walk out, and everybody was like, what? For some reason, I was good at it, you know, or forceful enough, you know, not in a bad way. It was very, very exciting. But then, of course, all other companies came in and eventually, but we won a cruise trip. We won 2 cruise trips, actually. So that was fun. Didn't save a penny. Yeah. We were stationed in Ottawa for a few months. We had an office in Ottawa. That was really nice. And Ottawa was very different.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So then that ended, and he was having a really hard time finding work. He tried other sales stuff, but nothing was as perfect as this. I mean, deregulation is a whole new thing. And so we were kind of going into debt a bit. And I was driving a school bus because I could take my kids, and they paid $15 an hour in the 1990. You know, it wasn't badly paid, and it was very exacting. I mean, if you had an accident, the only reason an accident wasn't your fault was if something fell on you from the sky. She's stopping me.
Yeah, just 1 second, sorry.
It's okay.
All right, good.
Okay. So the SDO, and then the STN offered us, they said, we want to open a place in the States. And we, of course, could work in the States, right? So they wanted us to open an office, and they were scouting around and asked us where we wanted to be, and then it fell apart. And they found it fell apart. And I said, oh, I really want to go back to the States. And so my husband said, okay. So I had the what do you call it? Pledge Allegiance posted, you know, in big posters on the dining room walls, and the words to the national anthem, so the kids could learn all that stuff. And Canada was wonderful, and I didn't realize, you know, I'm not a particularly aware person of things when they're happening, and I didn't realize. I thought the States was like it was when I left, because I didn't pay any attention to politics. And I was 18 when I left, so really I only knew the party line. I didn't know very much. And my mother was a big, you know, rah-rah America person. She taught, you know, American history to 5th graders. And Canadian history is kind of dull. Like they were given plots of land and they brought their servants with them, and they pioneered that way. And I would read all that stuff, but it wasn't exciting, like, you know, Little House on the Prairie stuff. So I really wanted to go back, and we only had we had 4 days because we had 2 kids, and we had to give them to somebody to take care of while we drove in and drove around the East Coast to figure out where we wanted to live, because I didn't want to go on the West Coast because they're
Weather and
uh,
earthquakes.
earthquakes. And I thought if something happened, I'd never forgive myself. So we drove down and we went to DC and we went out to Blacksburg and Raleigh and we came around and came back. I thought I want to live at the top of the South. And because I don't want to be cold anymore. It was the coldest winter that they'd had, and we got to Ottawa in the beginning of May, and the Rideau Canal was still frozen. We think that's it, I'm done. And so, and then I went back, had 2 days, flew it back to find a place to live. So ended up in Williamsburg. We lived in Williamsburg. So we took the kids and we went. And that was it.
So how old were your children?
I think they were 8 and 6, or 10 and 8, something like that.
So
1996, yeah, 94. So they were 9 and 7, somewhere in that range. They had been to a school in Ottawa for 3 or 4 months. They'd been moved to this other school, and they'd done. I just found their report cards, and they were doing quite well. It was a French immersion thing, and they were learning French. And my older daughter ended up being a French major.
oh,
Yeah.
so she kept it up.
Yeah, and so then we were here. Yeah, so they had an interesting life.
Yeah,
Kind of remember it vaguely. And
it's crazy.
yeah, that's a lot.
Okay, let me look through the questions
Okay.
because we just had a nice talk and chat,
Yeah.
and it went nice and smoothly. But well, how did your parents weren't? Were they upset that you were living in Canada and you were staying in Canada, or did they just feel like, oh, she can come visit us anytime she wants?
Well, I used to go. They were retired. They went to Florida, and I would visit there, for Christmas and Easter. Usually after the holidays, right after the holidays. And my dad died in 82. My mom died in 96. I think I was a bit much for them. So I think they never really pined about the fact that I was gone. And, my mother would be, well, we don't, you don't call often enough. I made sure I called every Sunday and stuff like that. But I think I was a surprise because I was 10 years after my sister.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a bit of a relief. It was hard my mom. We brought my mom up, and she lived with us the last 10 years of her life.
Oh, so she lived in.
She lived in Canada, and then she moved. Well, she died as soon as we moved here. Unfortunately, can't move 82-year-olds around a lot. Well, which is only a few years for me. But people are different.
People are much old. They were much older back
They were
then.
much older then, absolutely.
Were you ever worried for your first husband during the time
Oh yeah, I was terrified.
for the threat of prison? And
Yeah. But it's hard to know whether I was terrified for him or for me because I didn't want to be without him.
it
That's
sounds
pretty
like you were
dependent.
very self-sufficient.
No, I was not self-sufficient at all. I was
Well, you were the self-sufficient one of the relationship.
I was, but I was emotionally dependent. But I was, I could do everything and didn't have any trouble, but didn't take any credit for it. I had a pretty low self-esteem.
Hmm.
That's why I need to get out of the house.
Didn't you say in our pre-interview phone call, you said that the government kept sending you checks?
Yeah, right. That was the thing I was trying to remember. Yeah, they sent me checks for 6-8 months after we'd left, and I kept my check, not his check, my allotment check, and I kept sending it back because I thought, I
That
don't want
could be
him hauling
illegal.
me back. Yeah, right. And I would write a note, we're not here anymore.
I'm not going to tell you where we are,
Yeah,
but we're
yeah.
not where
And
you.
the checks went to my address at home, and then they would forward. It was funny. Yeah. Thought, boy, how stupid can you get? As you say, there wasn't much electronic stuff in those days.
Yeah, they didn't get the memo.
No, they did not. Thank God. Glad they weren't any better at it.
Well, I mean, did you in Canada? Was there an expat kind of community of conscientious objectors and deserters and?
There might have been, but we weren't connected with him. He was not a social human being, and I was just working and doing my job. there were a number of Dodgers in the community that I was in. A lot of Americans in the community, because the community had started with this person, Lee, gathering a group of American nuns and priests who were at the University of Toronto. There was a particular school, St. Michael's. And Gregory Baum, who's a very big, I don't know if you ever heard his name, Gregory Baum, well, he was a big guy in the Catholic Church. And they went in order to be educated by him, B-A-U-M, Baum. And they wanted some help, and she ended up doing therapy with them, and they ended up being the original therapists, original group of therapists. So there were a lot of Americans. I don't know why there would be a lot. Well, maybe because they knew people. I don't know. But there were a lot of Americans in Fairfield.
And you,
Because of the age. We were all in our 20s. Everybody was in their 20s.
you said that you were raised Catholic,
No,
right?
I-
No, you were raised Jewish.
No, I was raised Protestant.
You were raised Protestant.
But we celebrated High Holy Days, Jewish High Holy Days. We celebrated Christmas, not so much Easter. But my parents sent me to Protestant church, which I went to. I was quite involved. I was soloist in the choir and stuff like that. That was the minister who supported me. Later, was our sponsor when we finally immigrated. And then when I was old enough, must have been after I got confirmed. I got confirmed, baptized and confirmed at 13 in the church. And then my parents got married in the Catholic Church because they'd only had a Justice of the Peace wedding, because they wouldn't agree to bring the kids up Catholic, which was required. So then they got married. So there we are with my brother, who's like 20-something, and my sister, who had 2 babies, and me at their wedding. And they finally got married so my dad could go to confession, because he couldn't go to confession. And he was 65, and he wanted to be able to go to confession. So they got married, which was very nice of my mother. And she had been an Orthodox, she was growing up an Orthodox Jew.
And you have like all of the religions going on here.
Yeah. And I think my brother told me that when they got married in 1930, 31, that her parents didn't invite Joe my dad, to stuff. He looked like Perry Como, my dad, when he was young. He was very charming. And then they had my brother after like 5 or 6 years, and they had him circumcised. And then they invited my father. Then everything was okay. I thought that was funny. It's important.
Everybody wants their
Whatever.
progeny or some, like the generation that's going to come forward. So
Yeah, and he married a Jewish girl. And they were always very nice to my dad. I mean, I didn't know any of this. They really liked my dad. My dad was a lot of fun. And my dad's family, my dad was one of 10 kids. And they were on a farm in Fredonia, New York. And many of them became educators, actually. That's how you get out from
farm.
first class to the next, middle class. They were all very nice to my mother, but my mother was never very comfortable. But they were very nice to her, but they were a lot of fun. We had family reunions in Chautauqua Lake all the time. It's a weird family background.
Well, I think that, I feel like everybody's normal is someone's weird. You know what I mean? Like, we think what we have is normal.
Yeah. Well, I think it's better to have a mixture of things, because you get to see a whole bunch of different things, and you're not like narrowed down to only one way.
Mm-hmm. Of thinking.
One thought, yeah.
How did you feel when you heard Saigon fell in 1975? Did you have any
Paid
reaction?
no attention to any of it. It wasn't a political thing. It was a moral thing. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, those questions, I had to cross them all off because I forgot to bring that. I had nothing to say. Just was not an activist.
Is there anything that you wish that I would ask you that I haven't asked you yet?
Well, I guess I just wanted to say that a lot of Ray's beliefs had to do with Buddhism and Eastern religions. And I learned a lot about that, and that was really important. I think that was really valuable. It's stuff that's like very central to me in a way too. And that it was the 60s when you were investigating what was going on in, what had gone on in the 50s, which was an extremely repressive period. And you just didn't want that, you know. And that was, the choice was you were either, I mean, as a girl in high school and stuff, all that stuff about your reputation and what you could do and you couldn't do, and I was all so awful. I'm not sure that it's gotten better, it's just gotten different. And the patriarchy, that whole thing. So it was really, well, our story is a story of the times, it really is. That's why I wrote in, because I just think of it that way. And we were both people who weren't very good at conforming. I'm not sure he wanted to. I've always wanted to. I just haven't been able to. I'm just not very good at it. So.
But what did he put any of the information about his beliefs in Eastern religions in his application, or did they just have a box to check, like
He probably
Catholic?
did. He probably did. Well, the only people who could get conscientious objector status at that point were Baha'is and Quakers. That's how it was limited. Certainly weren't Baha'is. I didn't know anything about Baha'is until then. I don't know. I don't know what he put on that. But it was like, these are the rules, You're Catholic, you don't have any past history of having done conscience objector work or anything like that. You're just Catholic, so no. Yeah, I'm sure, if he had maybe, if he had been someone who'd been working as an activist or something like that, it might have made a difference. But he wasn't. He was just a musician staying at home, being supported by his parents. But he was, he had really strong beliefs, and I'm still very much, I'm still very anti-military. And the things that I learned in the military did not make me any more military, made me less. I had a brother-in-law who was Marine of the Year one year. My sister's husband. Oh, God, what a horrible person. It's gotten better, but it's pretty horrible. And it's just, I'm not, I'm a conscience objector.
Well, you definitely had the full breadth of experience. And so if you came out on the other side still feeling that way, then I think you wasn't all for nothing, There has to be space for different views.
Well, who knows? I mean, I always think, well, if somebody attacked my kids, well, I'd probably do something about it, but I'd probably always feel guilty about it. I would never be able to. I mean, I'd live with it, but,
Yeah.
I have a really hard time on Memorial Day because it gets so glorified, and it really bothers me. It would be okay if we talked about the fact that we made mistakes. We shouldn't have fought in Vietnam. A lot of people got treated really badly, Vietnamese to start with, and us, our kids. War is good business, invest your sons. I believe in that stuff. What if you had a war and no one came? I mean, that's my point of view, but we don't get any closer to that because we keep glorifying it. And now we're really upset because we didn't treat them well when they came back. And I understand that, but that's all we think about. We don't think about the fact that maybe they should have said no, which 18-year-olds are not very good at. But we certainly didn't make it easy for them to say no, and we were just willing to sacrifice them. You know, just send our kids off, and then it's the old people who send the kids. But, you know, at the same time, you have awful people trying to take you over. What if that happens? I mean, it's very complicated, but I think the basic stance could be a lot better than it is. So, it's a lot of money involved. So, money and power, and men. Bad combination. That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story.
Thanks for listening.